The top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. The United States and China agree a temporary ceasefire in a trade war between the world's two largest economies.
Both sides on the reciprocal tariffs will move their tariffs down 115%.
The Prime Minister announces a migration crackdown restricting overseas hiring for low-skilled workers, but refuses to give a target figure. Plus, corruption in plain sight. Democrats slammed Donald Trump over accepting a luxury Boeing 747 from the Qatari royal family. Very good morning on this Monday. Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. The United States and China have agreed to lower tariffs for the next 90 days in a major de-escalation of the trade war between the world's two largest economies. As part of an agreement that's been hammered out in Geneva over the weekend, China said it would also suspend or cancel non-tariff measures taken against the United States.
We have reached an agreement on a 90-day pause and substantially moved down the tariff levels. Both sides on the reciprocal tariffs will move their tariffs down 115%.
Let's get more on this from the chief economist at Aberdeen, that is Paul Diggle. Paul, very good morning to you. This has frankly come as somewhat of a surprise, hasn't it, today?
Yeah, I think it is right at the top end of market expectations going into the weekend. It's a pretty positive development, a substantial reduction in the vast bulk of the reciprocal tariff element between the US and China. That's why markets are rallying this morning, why they're in risk-on mode.
Why has this come about? As in, it does seem, obviously, both sides have given ground because both sides, frankly, were coming under pressure, weren't they, as in the United States and China?
Yeah, I think the US administration felt that it was simply not sustainable to have 100% plus tariff rates with a major trading partner. That was an effective embargo between the US and China, which, if sustained, would have in time seen a complete cessation of trade between the two economies. The administration, I think, belatedly realized that it went too far post-Liberation Day and then the subsequent ratcheting higher of US-China tariffs, and it's been looking for ways to climb down in a face-saving way. And I think that this deal, or this, the start of a deal here, has allowed them to do that.
And in saying that, China too, I mean, there's been reports, haven't there, that there have been some layoffs in Chinese factories, that they were concerned about employment. This is something that, frankly, has happened because China wanted to happen too.
Yeah, there's underlying slowdown in the Chinese economy that was in place well before Liberation Day. It was to do with the housing sector and subdued consumer confidence, and then additional tariffs on a big source of foreign demand and ratcheting those higher in that sort of retaliatory way. That was a problem from China's perspective as well. So they were looking, I think, going into the weekend for ways to climb down as well. Again, it needed to be in a face-saving way. Neither side seemed willing to be the first mover, but over the weekend, this high-level delegation seems to have found a way to sort of have a win-win climb down in tariff rates. Of course, question marks about what happens next and whether it's sustained. But right now, this is positive news.
And we'll come on to what happens next in a second, Paul, if we can. But we also must not forget that while this is better than what we saw 3 days ago, it's still worse than what we had just over 3 months ago. I mean, the tariffs are still in place and they're still pretty high at 30%.
That's right. And the best single summary statistic to look at, to think about the course of the trade war, is the US weighted average tariff rate on the whole world. When Trump came into office second time around, that was 2%. At its peak post-Liberation Day, it was closing on 30%. And with this latest reduction in US-China tariffs, it looks like it's more like 12%. So that is clearly well down from the highs, but still 10% or so up from the lows. Now, a rule of thumb to have in mind is that every 10% increase in the US weighted tariff rate in the rest of the world could be up to 1% off growth, 1% onto inflation. And it's going to also be a disinflationary and negative growth shock for the rest of the world as well. So this is good news relative to where we were a week ago, but it's still a negative development for the economy relative to where we were pre-Liberation Day.
Yeah, Paul, I'm just seeing our colleagues at CNBC saying that the Dow futures have rocketed by 1,000 points after this agreement. But there is still a lot of uncertainty, isn't there? Because frankly, this is on the surface at least, a temporary suspension. And let's be honest about this is a president of the United States who seems very willing to change his mind at any time.
Yeah, there's tough talks coming up both in this 90-day suspension and don't forget the 90-day carve out of the broader reciprocal tariffs as well. So as things stand, except where specific deals have been done, say with the UK, they are going to come back on eventually. Now, my expectation is that there will be continued talks both between the US and China. Some progress will be made. Perhaps there'll be minimum purchase agreements. Perhaps there'll be an easing up on critical mineral export supply to the US, or a reduction in other non-tariff barriers. There'll be some other bilateral deals as well with the rest of the world. India, Japan, both seem to be closing in on some form of deal with the US. But look, this is a president who likes tariffs. Tariffs are his go-to economic policy tool, and it's perfectly plausible that a chunk of the reciprocal tariffs, a chunk of the US-China tariffs come back on. And don't forget that there are sector-specific tariffs on the pharmaceutical sector, on the semiconductor sector to come. Trump obviously was talking about tariffs on foreign-made films. Now, I think there are going to be a lot of technical hurdles to that, but tariffs are still the go-to policy tool. So what I would say is over-extrapolate the positivity that Trump put at your peril. Certainly positive this weekend, but challenges ahead.
OK, Paul Diggle there from Aberdeen. Thank you very much indeed, live for us in Edinburgh. Now, the news comes this morning as Chinese companies have reported to be replacing foreign components from the supply chains due to those US trade tensions. So what do the talks at the weekend mean for global supply chains as we go forward? Delighted to say we're speaking to Chief Research Officer and co-founder of supply chain intelligence company 0100. That's Kevin O'Mara, who also advises companies such as Walmart, PepsiCo, Nestle and TikTok on their supply chains. Just before we get into this deal, Kevin, just give us a sense of what the impact of the tariffs has already been on supply chains, particularly obviously between China and the United States.
The impact of the tariffs right out of the gate was incredibly disruptive because it took away certainty about how people can plan shipments, how they can plan factory engagements, how they can plan engagements with their suppliers. And it was very, very disruptive for everybody from retailers to consumer goods makers. So it's been a big, big upset right from the get-go.
And it's fascinating. I think even Scott Bessent said this because the tariffs were so prohibitive that effectively there was a trade embargo, if you like, with China. And as far as we understand, companies like Walmart and Target were telling the White House this will lead to empty shelves.
That's exactly right. And exactly the reason that I think this weekend was a big success is the understanding in Washington is the geopolitical and macroeconomic factors are one thing, but shortages on the shelves and prices spiking is something that would be politically extremely painful for the president and for the administration in Washington. So supply chains sort of sensitivity to the availability of everything from electronics to shoes to input materials, chemicals and food ingredients. All of these things were being highlighted by supply chain leaders and CEOs in Washington as something that was going to affect consumers like quickly within months. And that, I think, woke people up. And that drove a lot of the positivity in this weekend's conversations.
Kevin, you're in Florida, of course, the home of President Trump in many regards. Do you think he might regret Liberation Day? Think he went a bit too far?
Great question. I mean, this is sort of a political question, a personality question. I think the answer is no, because I don't think President Trump ever regrets anything he does. It's just the way his brand works. I think we collectively might regret it because there was so much disruption, that bubble of inventory and uncertainty and delayed shipments and shifting plans. That will drive some reduction in economic growth, and it will drive some price increases. The GDP of the U.S. went down, I think, 0.3 of a percentage point this first quarter. So that's something. Will he regret it? Probably not, especially not if the start that came this weekend and the beginning of this mechanism, which I think is a genuine thing that Bessent talked about, leads to things loosening up, I do believe both sides really do want to work together. And I think, frankly, China and the US are friends in the long run. So I don't think Trump will regret it. And I think he'll probably end up being exonerated in the long run by the way these things end up playing out.
But Kevin, isn't the key thing here what businesses need, what trade needs, what global supply chains need is certainty. And that is something that, frankly, whatever happens, I don't think that's going to change in the next 3.5 years. Donald Trump is not going to provide any certainty, is he? I mean, he is someone who is very willing to change his mind, to react to events, to statements, to lash out in some regards.
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that. I mean, that is absolutely his mode, is to go around just throwing things out there and seeing how they land. Like, for instance, saying, maybe tariffs should be 80% instead of 125%. That was the kind of statement that really loosened things up this morning. Volatility is something investors dislike. Business in general dislikes it. Supply chain people who have to worry about 20 and 30-year investments in plants and supplier development, they really don't like it. So I think there's a bunch of uncertainty that remains ahead. I don't think in the long run this has been good for supply chains, except for it's kind of the COVID effect. Being woken up by a crisis has caused supply chain leaders around the world to figure out what their exposures are, what it really costs to shift production to different locations, i.e. closer to the customer. It's something people are studying more carefully now than they ever have. So yes, I believe Trump will continue to be a source of volatility, which isn't good. But I think the hardening of supply chains around the stress factors introduced by this are actually positive in many ways.
OK. Fascinating stuff. Kevin, really appreciate your time this morning from 0100 there, live from Key West in Florida. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's bring you up to date with some of the rest of the business stories this morning. We're going to stay in the US because President Trump is being gifted a luxury Boeing 747 by the Qatar's royal family, which will be refitted and reused as an interim Air Force One. It's expected to be handed over to the president during his upcoming visit to the region this week. He's defended the arrangement, calling it transparent and a good deal for America. But Democrats have called it corruption in plain sight. Pakistani stocks have recorded an 8.8% climb, forcing a temporary halt in trading. Investor confidence has risen following news of that Pakistan-India ceasefire holding and the IMF approving another $2.4 billion loan. The KSE 100 index gained the highest day-on-day increase, reversing most of the losses incurred by the outbreak of the worst conflict between India and Pakistan in at least 2 decades. The number of UK entrepreneurs voluntarily shutting down viable businesses has hit the biggest and highest rate since the pandemic, with advisors blaming tax rises. Figures from Company House show the closures reached over 12,500 in 2024-2025. That's the second highest on record after nearly 15,000 liquidations during the COVID pandemic. Don't forget, you can get more on that, indeed the rest of the business news. All you need to do is scan the QR code that's on your screen right now to access the Sky News Money blog on the Sky News app. Now, the Prime Minister has announced a migration crackdown, which will end automatic settlement after 5 years and will heavily restrict employers' abilities to hire overseas workers for low-skilled roles. So how will an economy with net migration of over 900,000 migrants a couple of years ago adapt to what Sir Keir Starmer has called a significant fall in immigration? Well, Anna Watson is the chief executive of Ingenuity, a charity representing thousands of small businesses in the engineering sector. And a very good morning to you. First of all, your reaction to what the Prime Minister had to say this morning.
I think there was lots of positives from, I think, the Prime Minister in terms of reducing net migration, and we know we need to do that. But I would also urge caution. We've got a brilliant industrial strategy coming from the UK, but also particularly in sectors like engineering, manufacturing, we just can't train up experienced workers overnight. It takes 3 to 4 years typically to train an apprentice. But I do think we've been talking about a skills gap in the sector for many years. And it's now time for industry, government, working with organisations like Ingenuity to finally do something about the burning platform that is skills.
So, Anne, what you're saying is that, particularly in your sector, engineering, for example, great the government wants to invest in skills with the workforce here in the UK, but in the short term, your sector and others are going to have to still rely on migration.
Yes, absolutely. We have got to get the right balance between making sure that employers have the skills that they need. And for some of those skills, unfortunately, it will be importing skilled and experienced workers. But we need to take a much longer term view. For skills, we're very short termism in this country. And we need to look much longer term and work collectively. It's an industry problem, it's a government problem, it's everybody's problem, and we're only going to solve it by coming together. And it's really up for the challenge.
Yeah, practically, how do we solve this, though? I mean, what, is it about incentives in the sector? Is it about actually, providing better courses, more courses around the country? What is the solution to this if it's not migration?
It's having some of the right mechanisms in place. Within engineering and manufacturing, the vast majority of apprentices are employed by small businesses. And we've just heard how the current volatile environment is having an impact on the supply chain. So there's a number of levers that I think between industry and government that we can make use of. We need to help SMEs, make it much easier for them to access funding and also get access to young people. We need to improve the perception of the sector. There's some fantastic jobs within engineering and manufacturing. The salaries are brilliant, but we still struggle to get that message across to our young people.
Do you fear, though, that in the end, I mean, given where the government is, we know where the Conservative Party is, and we certainly know where reform is when it comes to migration, that maybe when it comes to business, the politicians might go too far, that it might harm sectors in the drive to politically deal with this issue of migration, that it might harm your sector and the wider economy?
Yeah, I do believe that is a potential risk. Again, the time taken to train these people. So, for example, if we take welding and welders, we know we've got a big skills gap in this country for welders. We bring people in from the Philippines, but it's going to take 3 to 4 years to train a welder. So we've got to, I think, have the right conversations with government, with employers, that migration can't be a long-term solution, but there is a need for it whilst we train our own.
OK, Anne, really appreciate your time this morning. Anne Watson there. Thank you. OK, you're watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we'll be looking at how the markets are reacting. The FTSE, not so much. Better news elsewhere. We'll have all the details after this quick break.
show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Slide minutes, slide better. Flying minutes, fly better. Thank you.
Very welcome back to Business Live. As you can see, the dollar is obviously strengthened today in regards to what we heard coming out of Geneva in regards to the US and China. The other big story today, though, of course, is migration. We heard from the Prime Minister earlier on talking about how he wants to see the numbers come down significantly. Well, in the last couple of minutes, we've heard from the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch.
It was astonishing listening to Keir Starmer's proposals. I think Labour are taking the public for fools. Many of the things he was announcing are things that they are voting against right now. We brought in salary thresholds when we were in government just before the election. The first thing Keir Starmer did in coming in was scrap them. So now he's saying that he's going to have a white paper to look at the same proposals he just scrapped later. Labour are taking us for fools.
So he's changed his mind, you're saying, on several aspects of this, but from what he's announced this morning, English proficiency has to be improved, scrapping the health and care visa. Are they sensible measures?
Well, we need to tackle the high number of people coming into this country. Immigration is too high. So we want to support all the sensible and good measures that will help bring it down. But we have a bill in Parliament right now where none of those measures are going in. We've been putting things in. He has been voting against them. Take indefinite leave to remain. We wanted it to be 15 years. It's too quick, the rate at which people get British citizenship. We need to do something about that. He's watered that down to 10 years and again kicked it into the long grass. But of course we want to see sensible measures on migration. It is far too high. My party has acknowledged that. But what I have done now that we are under new leadership is get everyone in my party to sign up to the new, much tougher proposals.
Your proposal is to have a cap on migration. The Conservatives had caps before and then exceeded them. Do you concede that the Conservatives in government failed on migration, and do you take responsibility for that as a member of the Cabinet?
No, I was not running that Cabinet, but more importantly, it was not a legal cap. It was just an informal one. I'm talking about putting serious things into legislation, like a cap on the number of people coming into the country, until we deal with the situation that we're in. The fact of the matter is that public services are being strained. There are many people coming in, there's not enough housing, people can't get GP appointments. That's the problem that we're trying to solve. Simply letting more and more people in or kicking tough solutions and decisions into the long grass with a white paper is not going to solve the problem that we have right now. We need to deal with this now. There is a bill in Parliament, there are measures which we've put in, that Labour has scrapped, and what they should do is accept some of our amendments. We can work together on this, but they don't want to work together, they want to kick it into the long grass.
So do you believe these measures will slash migration, as Keir Starmer says they will?
I think Labour are taking us for fools, quite frankly. I think they are taking us for fools. This is nowhere near the scale of the change that we need to see. There's only one party that is serious about solving this issue. We're not, like Reform, announcing more ministers. That's not what's going to solve the problem. What will solve the problem is systemic change. Things like disapplying the Human Rights Act. We had a deportations bill last week that had that, as well as several tougher measures. Labour has had an announcement this morning that's about watering down good proposals. It's not good enough. They are taking us for fools.
Can I just ask you finally, the care sector are very concerned about these measures, saying they won't be able to recruit people from abroad. They will be short of people to look after our elderly and vulnerable. Would you encourage British people to take some of those jobs, to fill some of those vacancies?
Absolutely. We need to make sure that we have enough people in our country working before we start looking to other countries. And this is one of the things that has helped drive up the costs and the scale of migration, because it isn't just the workers who are coming in, it's also the dependents that they bring in. That's when it stops being a net benefit and becomes a net cost. The small boats crisis is getting worse. It is a lot worse than it was this time last year. Labour are doing nothing on it. They need to do things now, and there are opportunities and proposals now that they can take forwards, not just announce a white paper looking to the future.
There you go. That was Kemi Badenoch, the leader of His Majesty's Opposition, responding to the Prime Minister's immigration announcement this morning. We've also heard from the Liberal Democrats in the last couple of minutes saying that they think it is right the government is taking steps to fix the broken immigration system, but needs a clear plan to make it easier to recruit British workers instead. There'll be more, of course, at the top of the hour on that. Let's scroll through the markets quite quickly, if we can. As you can see, the Asia markets all doing pretty well this morning. The Hang Seng up nearly 3%. In Europe, we've also got a pretty positive picture on the back of those US-China trade talks. FTSE moving a bit less so, but it's still in positive territory this morning. And when it comes to the currencies, the dollar really has done quite well today. That has impacts, of course, it against sterling and the euro that are both down. And very quickly, a look at oil, which is up today on the back of that, with the expectation that there will be increased trades. OK, that's it from me for Business Live for the moment. We're back at 4:30 this afternoon. Do join me then if you can. The rest of the news coming up at midday here on Sky News. I'll see you a little